welcome to this week's review of My Hero Academia for the latest episode entitled Encounter Part 2. Before we get into the review itself, I want to know what you thought about this episode, dear listener. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comment section down below and you will get read out in next week's show. Whilst you're there, be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the button, do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do, because YouTube's an increasingly scary place for small content creators. Support your local small content creator today, it will do them a power of good. Now, on to the review. Good news, everyone! I'm not going to complain about the title to this week's episode. Hooray! Honestly, when I learned what the title to this one was going to be, I was a little bit confused, and it left me wondering, there was an Encounter Part 1, but we'll discuss that in a little bit more detail later on. In the meantime, let us start out with the positives, as we always do at the start of one of these reviews. And I have to say that this episode was a thrilling and action-packed affair. It was animated almost impeccably, with almost every single scene and sequence being borderline cinematic at times. It really just shows just how much this show has evolved and grown in terms of its animation style, to the point now where it's easily rivaling some cinematic affairs. The only downside to the animation this week was that bit in the episode where Endeavour was flying towards Tomura and he was talking on the radio. The animation there looked a little bit crude, just the way that he was talking, it was a bit too flappy mouthy for my liking, which I know isn't really a technical term, but whatever, we'll move on. One of the things that I really did love about this episode is just seeing the metamorphosis of Tomura. It is just incredibly chilling. He has become this cross between bestial ferocity yet villainous cunning, a man who has become both Jekyll and Hyde, though Jekyll has long since faded away and all that remains is this cold and deadly desire for painful revenge. He has crossed the Rubicon and become something wholly different and new, yet at the same time still retains this hateful sense of self. Yes, it is still Tomura deep down within there, but any kind of echoes of that lost child just looking for someone to take him in and give him a hug now has just been buried under countless amounts of stolen quirks and evil science. To see this transformation of him is just cold and unnerving in a way which I never really expected this program ever to go down, but of course that is a discussion for a whole other time. I really did like the connection bit between Tomura and Midoriya. I thought it was cool, even though I do feel that the one for all line that kept being repeated over and over again sounded a little bit too much like Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons. Just in the back of my mind, whenever they were saying it, I was just thinking,
"This is the voice of the Mysterons. I know you can hear us, Earthman."
Which, you know, not a lot of people are going to get that reference. And I'll admit, it didn't take that much away from the episode itself, because I still think that is a chilling and creepy little bit, this connection between the two of them becoming a lot more solidified, becoming a lot more of an active thing, especially seeing as they have the quirk from Ragdoll, so Tomura knows where he is. He can't hide. He could strike at any moment, which is a horrifying thought in and of itself. I think it was a great sequence, even if, for me, it kind of overcooked itself ever so slightly, but I'm not going to condemn it for it. I'm not going to hold that against it. You know, it was good to actually see Midoriya actually doing something in this episode for what feels like the first time this season. Now, as I said in the past, I understand why this is, because in the manga, it would have only been a matter of weeks or issues since he last did something. But in TV terms, he hasn't really done something since, what, the Christmas episode, or maybe the hellish Todoroki mini-arc bit. Outside of that, he's just kind of been in the background, so having him being brought forward and back into the fold and back into the focus of things, as much as it may piss off Bakugo, is something that is greatly welcomed, because, you know, it is kind of his show, and for him to just be a passive observer for so much doesn't really create a compelling protagonist, but, you know, that's a whole of discussion. One of the things I do like, going back to the matter of the title, is the fact that it feels more than just a reference to a previous story. This title and this episode marks a clear point of progression in the lives of both our main hero and our main villain. It creates a good chapter point for us to see how they have both grown since they last met one another, both not just in terms of power, but as people, as individuals, as hero and villain. It is a great mark, a great statement, a great milestone in their growth and development. And it wouldn't surprise me if that by the time this whole affair, this whole program, this whole manga ends, there is an Encounter Part 3, which will be the final confrontation of them, or at least the prelude to the final confrontation of them. But we'll see how that goes. As a whole, I have a lot of positive things to say about this week's episode. I'll admit I did go into it a little bit stressed out, but beyond that, it has been a really fantastic episode. I know I say the word fantastic a lot. I know that my vocabulary when it comes to doing the reviews isn't the best, but all the same, it is at times hard to praise stuff as full-throatedly as I should do, especially when the positive points are just so self-evident. With that said, however, let us get into the negatives, and as with last week, I do apologise if this feels a little bit more like nitpicks, but this episode was far and away, like, 90% good, with only maybe 10% or even less that I think didn't quite land for me. One of the big points I had with it, and this might just be a minor point, the minorest of minor points, in the version of the broadcast I saw, not all the subtitles were working. There were certain scenes, particularly with the title cards, where there were just no translations whatsoever. Now, something I've often discussed with my friends when it's come to trying to recommend this program, recommend it subtitled. One of the big problems I've had is just how over-congested each of the frames can be. You'll have the text that the character is saying with maybe a translation of a sign in the background, whilst also the little title card thing that appears that tells you what their name is and what their quirk is. And it is weird for me to just see moments in the program, in the broadcast, where there just isn't that. Where there isn't even a little mark that says earlier or what the translation of the title card is. I'm sure that it'll be ironed out for later releases and later streams of it, but for here and now, it just felt a little bit jarring to me. I can kind of guess what one of them said, which is that big black title card thing that came up earlier on. I'm guessing that said earlier or meanwhile or something to that extent. I don't speak Japanese, I don't read Japanese, but I can at least hazard a guess what was being said, especially bearing in mind we had a cut back to stuff that was happening over at the hospital, but we'll discuss that stuff in a moment. I will admit, I was expecting a little bit more from this episode, because of the title itself, which I don't want to sound like I am going to start complaining about the title again, because I really don't, but when we got into this episode, even excluding the title, when we knew what was going to happen, we're going to have this moment where Midoriya is connected with Tomura, and they're both looking for each other. I expected there to be some kind of confrontation moment, some kind of staring down between them, this Mexican standoff-like moment, some kind of recreation of the last time these two people met. But we didn't really get that. We probably will get that later on, and I think that it was probably better not to try and recreate that moment, albeit differently with different power levels, but there is a part of me that was expecting them to at least see each other, and the absence of that makes it feel like, okay, so now we're going to put that off for another week, and probably we're going to put it off for another week as well, and they probably aren't going to meet each other to the final part of this part of the arc, and then they probably won't do much by stare each other down and make a little bit of a speech, but outside of that, yeah, we're just dragging this out, and I don't think it should be, but whatever, we'll see as far as that's concerned. My only other complaint is the fact that I feel that this episode was juggling too much at once. We had all this stuff with Tomura and the ruins of the hospital and the surrounding area, and the pro-heroes are wound up with that and the stuff from Midoriya. All that stuff is fantastic, all that stuff is good, it's thrilling, it is chilling, it is engaging, it's dramatic, it's everything a good episode of My Hero Academia should be. But on the side of that, you got the stuff at the hospital, or rather, not the hospital, you got the stuff back at the Meta Liberation Army base, which doesn't really go anywhere. It just feels like connecting tissue, like a case of, alright, let us show a scene to show that things are still happening there, because they don't want to spend an entire episode over there. It's something that I think could have been its own episode, a part of a whole separate episode, because for me, here and now, it feels like it took a little bit out from the rest of it. It's like, I appreciate seeing Mount Lady doing stuff. I like the creativity of Cementos creating this big club. I like seeing Toga just stabbing people like she's some kind of mad slasher movie villain. But all that could have been its own episode. All of that could have been its own thing. And I'm sure that in the context of the manga, that probably was more its own thing. Or maybe that was its whole other episode, or was integrated better. Here and now it feels like a case of, oh, we need something to show that stuff is happening elsewhere. Doesn't really land for me, I'm afraid to say. As a whole entity, I think that this episode was fantastic. I know that I say that word too much, but it really was. It was a solid episode, and it had more to it than I was expecting it to. I worried, as I have said in the past, that Tomura getting his big power boost was just going to descend into an almost decadent display of despair and murder, which we haven't really had, and whilst there have been aspects of that, it's been treated in a way which feels far more mature than I think other writers would have done, and I'm interested to see where it's going to go now, especially bearing in mind both he and Midoriya are going to end up meeting in the next episode or two. I hope it happens soon, because there is a part of me that's starting to feel that this whole invasion of the Meta Liberation Army base stuff is starting to overstay its welcome. Which might seem a little bit odd for some people, that bearing in mind their feelings towards the joint training arc stuff last season, how long that went on, but hey-ho, different strokes for different folks. With all that said and done, let us get into Comment Corner! Our first comment comes from X1, who says, X-Less was merely channeling his inner link and smashed up that machine looking for rupees. I know that's not the exact wording of it, but hey, I'm dyslexic, give me a break. And you know, as far as that comment is concerned and the events surrounding it, you know what, if only X-Less had found a fairy, he'd still be with us. Duh. Look, I know that the matters surrounding that whole exchange are going to be something I'm going to discuss in another comment, but I will still just say, I think that the way that all that was presented felt a little bit stilted for me, a little bit stiff, and I don't know. I'm just going to start repeating myself if I linger on it too long. I just feel that that could have been done better than it was. Our second comment comes from Scott TV Gamer, who says, Actually, I'm pretty sure X-Less destroying the machine had nothing to do with Shiokari. I know I'm probably mispronouncing that, so I'll just say Tomura from this point on, getting shot. We even show the puddle under Tomura reach the wire behind him. In fact, him actually shooting his laser is an anime original edition. Not all the quirk-destroying bullets were destroyed, X-Less just got rid of most of them. Now, I find it really interesting the fact that this was an anime-only addition to it, as honestly, from what I've seen thus far, most of the anime edition stuff has been fairly better, but more well integrated than this. And I'm fascinated to see just how exactly Tomura woke up in the manga, because as I previously said, this just feels kind of a bit of a stretch. It feels a little bit too much of a leap for me. Now, I will admit, unless I'm mistaken, in this actual sequence as we see it in the anime, soon after we see X-Less fire his laser, we then see the wire come down, and that kind of implies that him blowing up that thing is the thing that brought the wire down. I'd have to go back and rewatch it, but that's at least what it suggests to me. And as I said last week, it feels like artistic flair to me. It feels like a Frankenstein reference in a way. Lightning bringing back the monster to life and all that kind of malarkey. I don't want to linger on this whole sequence too much because it feels like I'm going to start going nuts on it, but I'll be honest, if this is the one bad note, the one thing that feels like a stretch, and the one thing I don't like about something that's happened in My Hero Academia, the one thing, I'll be happy with that, because if anyone's ever watched any of my Doctor Who reviews, it feels like at times where it's more bad than good, but that is a whole other mess. Still, as a whole entity, you know, I understand, I just, wow. I want to find out what happened in the manga now as far as that's concerned. Wow. Anyway, what did you think about this week's episode of My Hero Academia? Leave a comment down below and you will get read out in next week's show. Next week, again, I've not watched the preview for it. For goodness only knows what's going to happen. I'm interested to see where all this is going to go, more just in general. I'm starting to ramble now. I feel like I've just had something thrown in front of me when I haven't. But in any case, thank you all for listening. Thank you and goodbye. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye.